Hi, this is Bass Sylenth, and we are gonna do another tutorial, this time on bass. A lot of people have been asking how I make that bass that was in the previous tutorial on the kick. It's quite simple. It's just one saw wave with one voice. Retrigger is on to make sure the consistent uh, sound. And when the retrigger is on, this every time you trigger the sound, it's going to be the same phase starting from the same point, so you get the same waveform every single time. The amp envelope is going to be full sustain with no attack, no decay, and no release. Sometimes you can do it differently. You can actually bring down the sustain and set your decay, so you get you shape the amplitude of your bass with this. But I use a different method, so I use this full volume, and then I use the clip fades when I bounce it back to audio and shape the volume that way. Once you have this set up, you move on to the filter. For the bass, you set low pass filter, no resonance, cutoff. I'll leave it there for now. You set your filter control. That's the final filter control. You close that all the way, and we're gonna modulate the filter with a mod envelope 1. So we're gonna set the decay somewhere around here and select cutoff. We set the mod amount using this knob here, and what happens is that when we hit the note here, it starts the note with the cutoff fully closed, and using this modulation, it opens and closes the cutoff really quickly, and that's how you get that plucky sound. So let's just play something and see how it sounds now. So it's just going to be an offbeat note for now, and then I'm gonna, once I have the sound ready and I'm happy with it, I'm gonna bounce it down and like write down my groove, which is gonna be like 16th notes. So let's listen to this. So basically, for your bass, you want to make sure that you get this decay to a timing that is right for your taste. There is like if you go too short, it's gonna lose that bassiness, and if you go too long of a decay, then you're not getting that pluck. So it's somewhere in the middle, and it kind of depends on your taste as well, what you prefer, but it will be in this range here. That's too short. That's too open. Somewhere around here. A question came up actually in one of my classes. A student asked where they should put the oscillator, in what frequency range. So I'm gonna put the spectrum analyzer on the bass so I can show you. You want your bass to basically hit around this area, in the sub area, which is around like 35 to 55, 60. You want your fundamental frequency to hit around there. So right now I have to bring this one octave down, and that's sitting around 50 hertz, which is okay for a sub. If you go anything lower than that, your fundamental frequency is now too low. You're hitting around 26 hertz, which is going to be super low. Other than really huge subwoofers, nothing can reproduce that sound. So you want to be in this area. So we're going to set it there. And now we are going to set this again to an amount that is Now if you can't get the click, you can't get your bass to click really well, you can add another amp envelope and modulate the cutoff again, but this time with a shorter decay. So what this does is just like adds a little bit of bite to the bass, and because it opens and closes really quickly, so this is a few milliseconds, it just adds that bite, and it doesn't mess up with your bass. Because if you were to for example, let's say you were doing this all the way open, your bass, your cutoff opens and stays open for this duration, and then it closes. So that might not be something you want to do. You want to maybe close this to get that bassy part of the bass, and then you may want to add your click with this second modulation. Just something to play around and see what you like. A lot of times I can get away with just one modulation. In the beginning we didn't add any distortion or any drive or anything. Keep it simple. Get the fundamental of your sound right, and then we're gonna add some distortion. So I'm kind of happy with how it sounds right now. Let's move to adding some distortion to the sound. There are a few plugins you can use for distortion. One is FabFilter Saturn, which is amazing for bass. The other one is Trance X by Waves. And you can also use the built-in multiband plugin from Ableton. The multiband is not a saturation, it's not like a distortion plugin, but because it has the crossover points between the bands, that defines each band frequency, and you get your sub separate than your lower mids and your mids and highs. So that's what we are looking for to shape the sound. So once you add this, you just want to set your crossover points to a frequency that is sounding good to you. For the first band, I usually go around between like 45, 50 to 80 hertz. So that's one option. I'm gonna put Saturn on now and try with Saturn, see what kind of sound we're gonna get. I'm also gonna put Smexoscope so we can see how this distorts the sound. Okay, we're gonna go, yeah, turn them off for now. Okay, let's do the Saturn. In the beginning, when you're trying to find the crossover points, try to set your drive to 0, so you're not fooled by the extra amount of distortion that it adds. Because in the beginning, we're just looking to find those crossovers and kind of define the frequency ranges. In the first part of the band that I'm trying to set is I'm trying to get the sub of the bass kind of defined and in its own range. Okay, so I think I'm gonna leave it around that. That's starting to sound good. If you want, and now that you have your bands defined, you can boost them a little bit if you need to. So this part adds to the click and bite of the kick. As you can see, I haven't done any drive here. This is all set to 0. So it's just defining those bands. Okay, let's have a look at the waveform and see how this affected the sound itself. So I'm gonna do one with no distortion. So that's the pure waveform that we had. It's just a saw wave. There's no distortion. It's a saw wave, and you can see that this is the cutoff closing. Now let's do. I'm gonna just duplicate this. So let's do the multiband and see how it looks like. As you can see, just adding this multiband dynamics, doing no compression, no nothing on it. Just by setting these bands, we are adding some distortion, and that actually defines the bass tone. And third one is going to be the Saturn. Okay, this off. So as you can see, 3 different sounds, completely different. And it really depends on what your taste is here. You can choose one over the other. You can also try Trans-X. Trans-X multi-mono. Okay, let's do one with Trans-X. Again, we're trying to set the crossover points here. So I'm sweeping between frequencies, and I go all the way left, all the way right, and then I kind of go in the middle and settle down on the frequency that my ear tells me sounds better. Okay, let's have a look at how this one looks like. Okay, so we have a few options. Which one is which? So they all add their own kind of flavor to the sound. They all sound different. So you choose one that works out best for you and stick to it. I'm gonna delete all of these and move on. I'm gonna stick to Saturn because that's the sound I like. And but every time I'm making a bass, this is the process I go through. I try all the different kinds of distortions that I can, and depending on what key I'm writing in, sometimes one works better than the other. So give them all a try. Now that I have this, I go back to the synthesizer again and see if I can find a better sweet spot for the cutoff point. that's sounding good. Before I bounce it down, I just want to do this kind of style as well and see if it still sounds good. It's sounding good. I feel like it's a little too sharp. I think I'm gonna settle on that one. Okay, now I am just gonna bounce this down and try to use the audio to write my bass groove. I can either resample this, or you can freeze it and bring it here. Okay, let's do this. One thing I wanted to show you guys. Unfreeze this. I'm just gonna group these together. It turned off the original bass that I have in the synth. I keep that in until the end of the project in case I need to come back and bounce the notes in a different pitch. For example, if I'm writing something that like jumps between the octaves, instead of pitching up or down the audio waveform, which kind of degrades the sound because of the warping algorithms, I try to actually export the original sound at the pitch that I want and get a clear one. So I leave it at that, and then I work with this audio file now. One thing I want to show you guys is because we added that Saturn plugin, it has its own latency, and because of that, it has moved the audio a little further in the line. And what happens is that if you had your groove between your kick and bass, this was here, now it's here, and if you add a 16th note, two of these together, then all of a sudden your kick and bass are gonna go out of phase. So what you need to do, you need to just come here and align this to wherever it needs to be, which for me, I usually set the transient right at the on the beat. So let's have a listen to that. It added a little bit of click here because it's abruptly cut here, but that doesn't matter. We're gonna fix that. So let's bring this to arrangement view. Yes. Bring it to arrangement view, and we're gonna write the sorry, it looks like I didn't fix it. So I just click on the transient, set 111 here, and what happens, it just brings it up front. Now we're gonna cut this part out. I'm gonna set a little bit of fade at the end of it, so it gives breathing room to the next note. And duplicate this. Now instead of, so the groove that I'm gonna go for is this. Now instead of changing the velocity on this one, I'm gonna create another track here, and this is something I learned from Sonic Species. It's a really smart way of doing this. Instead of changing the velocity in this, he sets it in a new track, and then you change the volume with this. The benefit of doing this way is that let's say you wrote this and halfway through your track you felt like your velocity note is too loud or too quiet, you want to change that, and you have to go in every single one and change them, which is really a pain. But this way you can just change this volume to whatever you want. So let's have a listen to this. that's sounding good. Gonna make them a loop. Just select this area that you want to loop, and I'm doing 1 bar, and then Command J or right click, consolidate, and then set it to a loop. So you can bring it back to the arrangement view, session view, and now you have a loop here. I'm gonna group these together as the bass group. That's sounding good. So now it's time to do some phase correction if needed, and EQ. So what I'm gonna do, I add, let's do the EQ first. So I'm gonna use FAF filter EQ Q2, fantastic EQ. If you don't have it, guys, get it. This is a must. And I'm gonna cut a little bit of the lows from the bass. What this does is gonna clean up the lows, and it gives room for the kick to come in better and actually tightens up the bass. So if you are using the FAF filter, try different settings on 0 latency and linear phase. Try different slopes here between 12 to 48 and see what works best for you. I'm just gonna keep quiet for a while and tune this to my liking. I like the linear phase better. When you're doing like a higher dB per octave cuts, linear phase tends to be better because it's more transparent. But it's really a matter of taste. When you're using zero latency, it's kind of the sound of the bass changes from what you originally had. So if you liked what it sounded before, then use linear phase to keep the sound integrity. If you are using linear phase on low harmonics, set it to high or very high and export it down. If you set it to very high, it's going to add a lot of latency to your workflow. So if you're playing a keyboard, it's going to kill you. So if you're in the beginning of your production, if you decide to go with the linear phase, make sure to bounce it down once you're happy with the EQ, and then just have the sound clear. Once I get my EQ right, I'm gonna add the Voxengo phase plugin and see if I can find a better spot for the phase of the bass. And what this does, it's just gonna change the phase relationship between the kick and the bass. Sometimes the kick and bass kind of add to the sub or subtract from the sub depending of where the phase is. So you might either lose some sub or have too much of the sub, and just with correcting the phase, you're gonna get the best balance. If you can hear, when I move it here, there's too much sub. And when I move it here, like the mids become more prominent. So I'm trying to find a balance to have everything in the right order. While you change the phase, don't just listen to the bass, listen to the kick as well, because it's the relationship you're looking for. If you put a Smexoscope on the master channel. So this is where it is at right now. I'm gonna change the phase on the bass and see. Look around here. So by changing the phase, you see these waveforms, they're kind of destructing each other, but here they're adding to each other. So where we had the phase in the beginning, they're kind of the sub frequency is adding up and in a nice way, so it's the bass complements the kick and it looks like a continuous waveform. And if you change this in a way that they become destructive waves, you can see that like this all of a sudden, instead of being like here, it's going in, so you kind of are destroying the waveform. And sometimes you can really destroy the sound that you originally had for your kick. Some settings here and see if I can destroy it and show you. Well, I am not able to destroy this waveform. But what I was looking for is sometimes you can actually, what you do is actually gonna like get rid of a lot of harmonics here, and like you end up with something like this and it dies here. So this is good, looking good, sounding good, so I'm happy with it. I might do some more EQing on the bass later on to either cut some of the frequencies here or boost a little bit of highs depending on how the track is sounding at the end. Because as you add more elements to the song, you need to kind of tailor your bass frequency. So I'm gonna leave it there. So this was a tutorial on bass. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something. Leave me a comment if you have any questions. I'll try to get back to you. And if you want to learn anything else in sound design, let me know. And if there's enough interest, I will cover that topic. Maybe I cover this kind of acid in the next time.